What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Modern Goonies Cinema, where we analyze and review movies and TV. I'm your host, Trevor. So October is finally here, and to get into the spirit of things, I wanted to talk about my favorite horror movie of all time, which is the 2012 film Sinister, starring Ethan Hawke. Not to be confused with Insidious, which is the one with the coma kid and the red demon. And I have to make that distinction because every time I talk about the movie Sinister, people think that I'm talking about Insidious. Two words that just have a bad meaning to them. So, as always, major spoilers ahead. Also, I won't be discussing Sinister 2 at all because it's not good, so fuck it. I want to start off by saying that horror is a very difficult genre to discuss because it's a lot more subjective than a traditional movie. What typically makes a good movie and what makes good horror are two totally different metrics. But there's a whole horror movie community that is insanely passionate about the genre, for better or for worse. And I know that there are going to be several members that vehemently disagree with my opinion of this film. Just know that I grew up on horror movies and I have a deep love and appreciation for the genre. What I personally look for the most in a horror film is a good plot with an unsettling and disturbing nature to it. Jump scares and outlandish and gory kills can be a whole lot of fun, but at the end of the day, I still want a really solid narrative from any film that I watch. And I am personally much more discomforted by being really creeped out than I am from jumping out of my chair for a brief moment, or being disgusted by watching a dude getting sawed in half. And there's absolutely nothing stopping horror from blending a legitimately well thought out plot with the typical tropes that we're accustomed to seeing. I mean, hell, look at Ari Aster's take on the genre. And this is where I think Sinister really shines, and it's part of the reason that I love it so much. It blends so many elements of horror that just about anyone who's a fan of the genre can appreciate. So, let's get into why I think that. First and foremost, the one thing that this movie does insanely well is that it has very real and relatable characters, especially in Ethan Hawke's character, Ellison Oswalt. And that's something that I think a lot of horror films really lack. They get so caught up in the premise or in the brutality that they forget to make their characters feel like real people and give them legitimate motivations rather than just feeling like unfortunate meat sacks. In most horror films, I don't really care about the characters at all, and I'm just waiting for them to experience horrific shit or be violently torn limb from limb. But with Ellison, I really do feel for him and understand his motivations completely, because the movie goes out of its way to show you just how deeply personal it is for Ellison to write another novel. Every time I watch the film, I can't help but feel deeply saddened at the scene where he's falling asleep to an old interview of him talking about his very first book. For those who don't know, Ellison Oswalt is a famous true crime writer whose career is waning long after his very first novel, Kentucky Blood, was published. After many years and many books that have failed to live up to the success of his initial novel, Ellison can't help but yearn for his glory days where he received tons of fame, recognition, and money for his work. When we first meet him in the movie, he's essentially going broke, having to downsize his home, and he's put his family through so much stress and instability that his marriage is on the verge of collapse, and his children semi-resent him from having to live in communities where their name has been besmirched because of the nature of their father's work and the failures that sometimes brings on. Ellison is repeatedly told by his family that they would be perfectly happy if he just took a low-level writing job or became a teacher, but he can't bring himself to do it because after receiving so much recognition for his early work, he feels that his life would lack fulfillment if he did anything other than writing famous novels. He considers it his legacy, to which he has to be reminded that his children and his family are his legacy, not his work. And therein lies the central conflict of the film. Ellison is willing to neglect and put his family in harm's way, physically, emotionally, and financially, if it means that he can recapture his 15 minutes of fame. So, desperate to write one more smash hit, he moves his family into the very same house as the scene of a grisly murder that took place just 1 year prior, without their knowledge, searching for the answers behind that family's death. And I mean, just what a good fucking narrative for a film. Everything else that happens, all of the horror elements, are all built on top of Ellison and his motivations and his dynamic with his career and his family, not the other way around, which is exactly how you tell a good story regardless of the genre. This is a movie that I would want to watch even if it wasn't horror, and that is my ultimate and nearly unattainable benchmark that I use to judge horror films. Ellison is obsessed, not so much with solving all these murders, but with regaining his career career momentum. So when he stumbles upon a box in his attic that contains all these film reels of all these different family murders, he can't help but to dive even further into it, determined to find a link between them all for his career's sake, ignoring the glaring dangers involved. I mean, he fully acknowledges at a certain point that the killer must have returned to leave behind evidence of all of his other crimes. But instead of doing anything to protect himself or his family, he just becomes even further convinced that this could be his big ticket back to stardom. The events of this film fit perfectly with his character, and it's why you don't have to suspend your disbelief all that much to wonder why he would continue to investigate all of this even when shit starts to get a little paranormal. And I also just really love the dynamic of the family. As a whole unit, they're not really pressured by a ghostly presence. In fact, the only two people that actually experience something explicitly paranormal are Ellison and his daughter Ashley. But the tension in the family is never a result of the abnormal happenings, rather the deep-seated issues that Ellison has with his career and his ego. When his daughter draws a picture of a dead girl on the walls, the reaction from everyone involved isn't terror that the house might be haunted. Instead, Ellison and his wife argue about the nature of his career and how his antics cause so much strain on everyone in the family. The fight is very grounded in reality in the midst of a literal horror movie, and it's a very sincere depiction. These people and their personal issues feel real, and they are what takes center stage in tandem with all of the horror elements. And I feel like that is a very difficult thing to balance in the genre. And another dynamic that I absolutely love is that of Deputy So-and-so. He's played by James Ranson, and I just fucking love this guy. He's the same guy that played Ziggy in The Wire and the older version of Eddie in It Chapter 2. He always provides just such a great comic relief to anything that he's in, and I just think he's a great actor. His awkward and kind-hearted interactions with Ellison give the movie some heart, and my only gripe with him is that I didn't get to see enough of him. And I know what you're thinking, but I must remind you, Sinister 2 does not exist. Alright, now I want to talk about why I love the scares of this film. This movie achieves its horror status by playing on the unsettling and playing on the eerie, more so than anything else. And if you took away the supernatural elements of this film, which I think there's a good case to be argued are kind of unnecessary, but we'll talk about that in a moment, then this effect could still be achieved. I mean, moving into a home where everyone was murdered and then finding a box of snuff films detailing their deaths along with the deaths of several other families would absolutely freak me the fuck out. I'd be out of the county by the time I got the lid off the thing. Then there's the nature of the deaths themselves. The films show that these families are apparently being unknowingly stalked. Then the footage abruptly cuts to everyone being bound, and then ritualistically killed in some gruesome and intimate manner by some off-screen killer. Then, when you look closer at the films, you see this fucking haunting-looking guy just standing tucked away somewhere in each one. Whether or not he's an actual demon, that is some incredibly unsettling shit. I mean, the shot of Bagul standing at the bottom of the pool in the film reel is one of the most unnerving scenes I've ever seen in a horror film, and it is my favorite shot of this entire movie. Something about an unknown figure just standing in the shadows has always deeply bothered me. This kind of scare will always be 10 times more effective on me than any jump scare or any gory kill. And this movie also plays on a very specific fear/eeriness that comes with old media and images. Like, if I was to look at nothing but an old photo, and somewhere in the background of this photo I saw some creepy looking figure, the lack of context and the ability for my imagination to run wild is what makes something like that so creepy. And the writers clearly knew that for this film, and they knew how to play on it perfectly. And speaking of, this film does have jump scares, which is definitely a staple of the genre, but I think they're used very effectively. Take this one, for example. I mean, fuck, that's a good use of a jump scare. And then, of course, there's the lawnmower scene, playing on the already very disturbing nature of the snuff films. And then, of course, there's some schlockier ones in there, like when Trevor, hello, pops out of a cardboard box in some kind of fake-out scare, or the one where all the ghost children are watching the snuff films in the attic and then Bagul pops out and scares the ever-loving shit out of Ellison. So even this movie isn't immune to industry trends or the typical tropes, but it's why I think it's a horror film for everyone. It's got true crime, it's got a relatable main character with solid motivation, unsettling images, gore and implied gore, effective jump scares, schlockier, more telegraphed jump scares, the paranormal, typical horror tropes, and the subversion of them at the exact same time. Whether you're a casual horror fan or a seasoned veteran, there is something in this film for you. But, you know, it wouldn't be a Modern Goonies video if there weren't some criticisms. As I said earlier, there is a pretty good case to be made that the supernatural in this film is kind of unnecessary. I think a lot of the same scares and eeriness can be conveyed in the same exact manner even if you took out everything otherworldly. You can keep everything the same and then just have the audience grapple with if Ellison is slowly going out of his mind, and really lean into his desperate ambition as a means to do so. Or if you were really dead set on this being a paranormal film, then you can make everything a lot more ambiguous, and it's only at the end when he finds the projector in his old home that he realizes, oh shit, everything I saw is actually real. But with the ending reveal that the children are being seduced by this evil entity into murdering their entire families, there's not really much more of a deeper theme to be derived from that, which is still totally fine. I just feel like something deeper could have been woven into the narrative, some kind of message from what was already established, which this film definitely does have a nice foundation to make some kind of philosophical statement, but it just chose not to. For instance, how the exploitation of true crime is what led Ellison into becoming the very victim that he's made his entire living off of. Or how Ellison, due to his blind ambition, was willing to sacrifice the well-being of his family, which directly led to their actual lives being sacrificed as well. So, you know, there's already a lot to go on there. But by the end, I get the vibe that it kind of just wants to be a creepy movie, and it's not really interested in expanding on those themes, which to me feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. Yeah, I know, it's a nitpick, but whatever, man. Something else that I noticed in my most recent viewing is just how bad the actress that plays Ellison's wife is. I somehow have never noticed this, and I'm kind of shocked that I didn't, because she is just not good. So there you go. If you like to watch horror for cheesy and bad acting, then there's a little bit of that in here too. Not Ethan Hawke though. I fucking love Ethan Hawke. Anyways, I also don't find children to be scary at all. My least favorite part of this movie is definitely when Ellison is walking around his house with a bat and all of these ghost children are kind of just following him. I just think it looks a lot more goofy than anything else. You know, maybe if they had kept their figures more submerged in darkness or really blurry and out of focus in the background of Ellison, then I feel like maybe it could have worked. Instead, they have full-on close-ups of the children, and I think it totally diminishes the unsettling tone that the movie works so hard to establish. That being said, I don't mind that the ending reveal is that the kids are killing everyone, but I do think when you introduce some of those elements, it does kind of lose a bit of intrigue. But how they subvert your expectations with the ending is what makes, in my opinion, a lukewarm reveal into something that really sticks the landing. The first subversion is when Ellison realizes that he's dealing with some very freaky supernatural shit that he can't comprehend. His first reaction is to throw all of his desires right out the fucking window, burn all of the footage, and immediately move his family back home in the middle of the night. It's not often in horror where the main characters actually do the wise thing and abandon ship. They even have the plot device in place for Ellison to be like, oh, well, we can't leave this home, all of our money is sunk into it. He just says, fuck that, I'm out. So that was pretty fun to see. But then comes the second subversion, which is that even though he did the right thing and left the house, it doesn't matter. And in fact, he actually entirely fucked himself by doing so. It's revealed that each of the families all lived in each other's homes, and it's shortly after they make an attempt to move away from Bagul that really marks them for death, since he's a deity that requires some kind of specific ritual to take the souls of children. And since Ellison lived in the home of a former victim and then tried to move away, it's game over. And yeah, what a good fucking twist. Sure, it's kinda lame that the kids are the one killing everyone, but getting wiser and trying to flee being the thing that seals your fate, along with being the very thing that connects all of these these murders together in a ritualistic way is a very good move in my opinion. And upon subsequent viewings, it becomes pretty clear that the writer set this up to be the case all along. At the very beginning, when Trevor has a night terror, Ashley mentions that she thinks she had one too, but she's almost immediately dismissed by her parents. Ashley is also the only one in the family that is directly visited by the ghost children. And she's seen learning the process of how to make Ellison's coffee from her mother, who goes out of her way to say that Ellison likes it in a very specific way. So at the end, apart from being stressed out of his ever-loving mind, it's part of the reason he doesn't notice that his coffee is drugged. Ellison also has a conversation with Deputy So-and-so that all of the families were drugged so that the killer didn't have to overpower them. Combine that with the fact that only one child is missing from all of the murdered families. When you add all that up, you realize that there were a lot of pieces laid out for you to pick up on. And that's always the best kind of twist. We can clearly see who's responsible, but we don't pay attention because we're so focused on the menacing nature of Bagul himself. By the time that Ellison and the audience pick up on who the real killers actually are, it's too late. And what a good fucking misdirection that is. And choosing to end on a note of cyclical nature is always a favorite of mine. This isn't a final girl movie, which is a trope in horror that I've never really been a fan of. I like my fucked up stories to end fucked up. And you'd have to imagine that if Ellison can't figure out and escape Bagul's ritual, then it's likely that no one can, as he's noted for his investigative prowess, and he was probably more likely to really look into this a lot further than the other families were. Which is also kind of a funnily morbid implication. All of these families beat the horror movie trope of staying in a haunted house too long. They actually packed their shit and left, and it's what killed every single one of them. I love it. So my final criticism is the exact ending point of the movie. This film should have ended immediately at the point where Ashley kills the entire family. We see this movie, except for one very quick scene, entirely through Ellison's eyes. So it breaks the movie's established viewpoint when we have an extended scene of Ashley painting the walls with the family's blood and then Bagul picking her up and taking her into the projector image. It's totally unnecessary, and I don't find it scary at all. Bagul is a terrifying force because he skulks around in the background and he never overtly reveals himself like a Jason Voorhees. The second that you fully show him and you show exactly how he steals children, you immediately strip away a layer of his eeriness, which the movie spent its entire time establishing. Plus, I just think the scene kind of looks lame. It looks a little out of place compared to everything else. It's a motto on this channel now, but kill your darlings. So, in conclusion, I think Sinister is an amazing horror film, and it really embodies all elements of the genre in a way that I think is accessible to anyone. Sure, there are other movies that do a better job of being thematic and scary, Hereditary being a prime example, or several movies that are a lot more schlocky and exaggerated, which can be more fun than scary. But Sinister can be enjoyed for its engaging plot and premise, which makes you take it seriously, all while still displaying typical industry scares that we've all come to know and love from the genre, and using them sparingly in a way that doesn't feel overused or played out like you would see in The Nun or some shit. And I think that's something a lot of horror films have difficulty balancing. The overall experience is something that will be a thrill ride, regardless of the manner of horror that you enjoy. And that, to me, is what makes good horror. And this, to me, is a good movie, not just good for a horror movie. One final note. A study in 2020 rated this movie as the scariest horror film, based on the viewer's heart rate, which raised 32% on average throughout. I normally wouldn't put any value into a study like that, and I still don't, but it suits me in this one moment to make my point, so fuck you. But anyways, happy Halloween, guys, and thank you so much for tuning into this episode. If you haven't already, put on Sinister before October's over and give yourself a thrilling time. Keep an eye out for the next video, and I'll see you then. Also, Ellison likes scotch, so he's a good man.